Okay, you are all being recorded. This is the second annual summit on self-determination. We're going to be hearing from CEO, or now chairman of calexitnow.org, Jason Wright. He'll be here in just a second to do the introduction to the ceremonies. Thank you, everybody, for coming. We have people from Canada. We have people from multiple African nations. We have Professor Kuvertrup, who's the top international expert on independence referendums. We have Professor Ryan Griffiths, who's the top American expert on referendums. We also have Professor Arend Liebhart, who's one of the world experts on democratic systems. I want to say thank you to Texas, Louisiana, New England, South Africa, Biafra, Batwa, and many other groups who you'll be hearing from today. So we're going to get started. We are recording. Jason Wright is going to do the introduction. I will then do a quick 1-minute speech on why we're here. We will then immediately go to Professor Matt Kuvertrup for a few minutes. We will then go to Professor Ryan Griffiths for a few minutes. And then our first official speaker will be Daniel Miller with the Texas Nationalist Movement. And then we will go from there. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Jason Wright. You're on.
Greetings and welcome to the second annual Global Summit on Self-Determination. I am your host for today's event, Jason Wright, the chairman of Calexit LLC, head of the California Independence Movement. I will be joined by my co-host, Professor Dahl, who is simul-streaming right now to other folks around the world. Thank you very much, Professor. I would like to firstly thank all who have shown up to participate in this historic, groundbreaking event. We all are movers, shakers, history makers, risk takers, and freedom seekers. From leaders of independence movements in the USA and NGOs across the world, to presidents and governments in exile, from cultural superstars and humanitarians to world icons and religious leaders, we have joined together some of the greatest hearts and minds humanity has to offer. Here, together, we stand united in our common goal, our mutual ambition of prosperity and freedom. We seek freedom from oppression from myriad forms, be they cultural, economic, educational, medical, governmental, societal, or even structural. All forms of oppression must be met with this form of legal and peaceful resistance. Though many of us have faced persecution for our desires for freedom, we continue to move on. We continue to move forward despite the chains around our wrists. We move forward out of spite towards those who tell us we can't be free. We move onward, away from those who wish to subjugate us and our future generations. We move away from hatred and usury and toward a compassionate society based on fundamental principles such as the right to self-determination, the right to discuss, learn, and grow, the right to clean air to breathe, clean food to eat, and clean water to drink. We crave these most basic of human desires, not only because they abound around ourselves, but also because we are denied them, because of the ways in which so many of us all are deprived of these things every day. We join here together to make our stand peaceably and resolute. We demand basic human decency and the right to be our own culturally significant selves. We demand to be seen and heard, and we demand to have our rights respected. Today, we will hear from groups across the entire world. We will hear things that will bring tears to our eyes. We will hear things which may leave us feeling shattered in our very souls. Fret not, though, for this means you, too, have compassion. We will hear heartbreaking stories, but we will also hear the uplifting ones. So many of us around the world have been working to help save and free our brothers and sisters. We will hear from people of strength and conviction. We will hear of connections made and friendships forged. Then let us not forget that we are all here together in a common pursuit. Let us share space, break bread, and strengthen each other. Let us live in our compassion while we listen to the horrors so many have experienced. Let us remain hopeful as we hear of these tragedies and atrocities, for we are here together. Let us remain resilient. We are here teaching, healing, standing up for ourselves and each other. And together, we can change the world for the better. Together, we can begin the process of healing the world one people at a time. We here at the United Self-Determined Nations do hereby declare our legal pursuit of our fundamental human right to self-determination. And with that, the annual Global Summit of Self-Determined Nations is now in session.
Awesome. Thank you all again for being here. So I'm going to do a quick speech on why we're here, and then we're going to go to Professor Kuvertrup, Professor Griffiths, then Daniel Miller, and we'll go down the line, starting with the studio, and then we'll go to everybody else around the world. Thank you all for being here. We've already seen some of the benefits of this. So real quick, the reason that we're doing this is because we kind of stumbled onto a gap. We did this a year ago. We had one or two other countries come and a bunch of different American states. And they said, it was Jason Wright's idea. And then he said, well, let's try a bigger one. What we found was from talking to the Mapuche in South America, Khalistan in India, Kurdistan in Iraq, Liberland, the Ogoni, the Batwa, the Biafra, the Western Togolandese. It's a similar story. Basically, what happens is that the United Nations is a group for existing nations. And there's an unwritten rule that they don't allow any independence group to really be heard because that's a threat to those nations. So I don't want you talking about my independence movement in my country because that could lead to a secession of my country. So because the United Nations is aimed at keeping global stability and the member nations in that organization, it has basically deferred to the will of those movements. This is the story that we've been told many times. We don't get to speak. We don't get to be heard. Our country makes sure that's not happening. We've heard this from 25 different groups around the planet who have absolutely no contact with each other. It's also backed up by this article from Foreign Affairs magazine. Self-determination shaped the modern world by 2024 Council on Foreign Relations. My bad. Whereas many world leaders openly call for the breakup of empires, few are willing to endorse the breakup of modern countries. Indeed, the United Nations founding charter explicitly discourages it. The fact that so many modern countries face internal divisions means few governments are eager to embrace the creation of new countries abroad. Countries fear that supporting self-determination abroad could set a precedent that leads to the unraveling of their borders. Basically, the Council on Foreign Relations admitted this. If you're an independence movement, there's not really a place for you to go and nobody really wants to hear from you. And the United Nations is basically built to make sure that that happens. In addition to this academic research, we've heard this from 20 different groups. On top of that, we've also heard the story that the international media will do absolutely nothing to help you. The story basically goes like this. If you're a corporation and you have a news corporation in my country, you don't talk about ethnic group X. If you do, I destroy your company and kick you out of the country, and then you lose the $100 million you invested to build the corporation in the first place. If you're a reporter and you talk about an ethnic group that I don't like, we blacklist you. And in many countries in Africa, that means you go from good job to third world abject poverty for the rest of your life. So you're basically saying I want to live poor and destroy my career for the rest of my days, if I actually report on the news. Collectively, that's resulted in almost no global attention and no United Nations attention on many different groups around the world. So we're providing a forum for them. The only other alternative was something called the Baku Forum. The Baku Forum was famously blown up last year, figuratively speaking. Baku is the capital of Azerbaijan, which committed an ethnic cleansing and genocide against the Armenians 2 years ago. So they're not really a good look for holding a self-determination conference, and they were called out for that when they held the Global Climate Change Conference there. The world exploded in rage at both the United Nations and the Baku government for doing that. So effectively, that means we are the only legitimate organization hosting this forum for independence movements around the world. Nobody else will do it, and the only group that recently was trying was largely discredited. We'll now go to our first speaker. That's going to be Professor Matt Kuvertrup. Admin, can we unmute the professor and let him speak, please?
The professor has unmuted himself.
Please, Professor, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Evans. It's actually a bit wrong that I'm the first speaker here, because my good friend Aaron Leipart and my good colleague Ryan Griffiths are way more distinguished than me, but be that as it may. So I'm here, well, for several reasons, really. I have written a book which I can show, and now I'm going to be laughed at because it's called "I Want to Break Free," and it's basically it is what it says on the tin. And when I sort of sometimes talk about it in forums like these, like this one, I say that I will explain independence movement and the politics, the sociology, and the economics of independence in 5 different pop songs that makes it sort of easier to digest, if you like. But before I get on to my playlist, as it were, I would say a few things about this that probably make me qualified to do this. I can see that there are people from Biafra, and my parents indeed were in Biafra at the time when the war started there. So I was literally born into being interested in this, and when I lived in Canada as a young man, as a child, the Québécois wanted independence. I did not live in the French-speaking part of the country, and my history teacher rang my parents to say they were concerned about my interest in the independence. In the independence movement there when I was 12 years old, and then when I started at university and also when I started my PhD, the Canadians, or the Québécois, were added again, and then I wrote a thesis on referendums, which was later published as a book. So in some ways, my academic career as well as my life has been intertwined with movements, with issues that pertain to independence, and I've also then in subsequent professional life as an academic and as a diplomat been working, for example, in South Sudan on the referendum there, and more recently in Bougainville and in Papua New Guinea, or part that's trying to secede from that. So those are sort of my biographical things, which I hope hasn't taken up too much time. Now, the 5 pop songs I would like to start with, or to sort of sum this up with, that I built it around, is first of all, I want to break free. So you wouldn't have an independence movement if you don't subscribe to what I call the Freddie Mercury theory of politics. I want to break free, of course, the Queen song, and there has to be a lot of desire for that. If you want to break free, you have to realize it's probably one of the most difficult things you can ever do. Mahatma Gandhi once said about independence movements, of course he was a leader of one, says first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, and then you win. Now, after what Mr. Evans was saying earlier, the United Nations Charter is not really made for this. Nevertheless, if we go back and look at how many countries were independent around the time of the end of the Second World War, it's only a third of what we now have. So countries actually can come into existence, and they do come into existence, but it requires that, and this is the next pop song, that you really get a movement started, that you're able to do the "Start Me Up," that's a Rolling Stones reference, and that you have a movement which is credible in a cultural way, that is able to link back to a shared history, a shared togetherness, if you like. When the Polish nation 200 years ago established itself, the great philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau said to them, you need to have values you can rally around. And he came up with the famous line, there would be no Spain without bullfighting. Now, a lot of Spanish people will take issue with that, but you need to have a cultural thing that you can rally around. Now, those sort of things probably go without saying. You probably also have a history of being a people. So the Start Me Up business is a cultural thing that you actually have to have something that you can rally around. It then starts to get a little bit more tricky when we move on to what I call the Tina Turner theory of politics. And this is one way it's a little bit stretched, but it's basically the part that I call what's law got to do with it. It's not quite a straight fit, but you will indulge me, I am sure. So what has law got to do with it? Well, quite a lot, really, in cases of independence movements. This is where a lot of independence movements come unstuck. In general terms, you can become an independent country if there is an agreement between two parts of the country that you should be allowed to have a referendum on independence. Now, I know a lot has been said in the news lately about Greenland, and I understand that the president of your country is going to take over that large island. I also understand that the Danes, in retaliation, are going to buy California, so you might have to take that into account, Californians. But I'm saying this slightly in jest that the Danes, if they're not being taken over forcefully by Donald Trump, the Greenlandics have an agreement with the Danes that they can have a referendum on independence at the time of their choosing. That's a thing that they also had in some parts of Yugoslavia, in Montenegro, where that was the case, for example, and also in Scotland. But it is relatively rare to have those. 5 minutes, I know I've got. Good. Okay. So all of these things that what law got to do with it would seem to be a major obstacle, because you can't just sort of leave. However, some countries have just left and have just become independent countries. And then a lot of people would say, well, are they recognized? And are they recognized by other countries? Well, recognition by other countries is one of those things that people talk a lot about, but it's actually not terribly important. What is really important for a state is that it can perform the functions of a state. In international law, and the Americans have actually, there's a thing that led the way in this, or following Mexico, really, there's a thing called the Estrada Doctrine, which means that if you have a defined territory, a defined people, and you're performing the functions of a state independently, without having sort of like a sponsor, if you like Northern Cyprus, for example. If you can do that, you are ipso facto a state. So states are facts rather than they are rules, and in fact that is the rule. And then quickly come on to what, if you like, the shake your money maker, the Ray Charles aspect of this, and just sort of very briefly, when we had the referendum in the United Kingdom, which is where I am at the moment, there were a lot of people who said, well, Scotland can't afford this. And I became a slightly minor celebrity when I pointed out that the rule in international law is that if you secede from another country, you don't have to pay that country's debt. So the first country that did that was when Belgium seceded and became an independent country. They didn't pay any debt back. When Texas became an independent country, it didn't pay any debts back to Mexico. And then subsequently, it was established that you don't have to pay the debt of the country that you're leaving, except you might have to an issue with international banks. But that's sort of like the legal doctrine. So From a money point of view, countries that become independent tend to initially lose a bit of money. It's a bit like the Brexit situation, probably also in the United Kingdom. But then people will say, well, that's probably worth it. And actually, if you look at countries that have become independent, after a period of about 20 years, they are probably up to where the trajectory was before. So I will sort of conclude this this playlist of a political science, and I have 1 minute left. And I will conclude it by moving on to what I think is also a Californian singer. I believe Neil Sedaka was from California, or if he wasn't, then, and we're not talking about O'Carroll here, we're talking about breaking up is hard to do. So when I'm looking around the room and people who are interested in this, you should know that this is a case of breaking up is hard to do. But then again, that song has been around for a while, and it might still be inspiring to some of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. Nationalist movement, are you there? Are you ready to speak, brother?
Howdy, Marcus. I'm just wondering if you were cutting into my time or yours.
No, I'm cutting into my time. And we also want to recognize and thank the San Francisco Chronicle. The San Francisco Chronicle sent a photographer here to film this event specifically for Calexit. Thank you to the San Francisco Chronicle for attending. We're going to go to Daniel Miller. Daniel Miller, tell us about the Texas independence movement. And in 10 minutes, why does Texas have the right to be independent? Daniel Miller of the Texas Nationalist movement. Please, sir.
Man, you know, Marcus, first off, I want to thank you guys for hosting this conference. I want to thank everyone who is attending, everyone who is watching, any of the fellow advocates for self-determination. And even after what Ryan said, I am going to give a hat tip to the academics as well. So
we love academics.
It was great. It was great to hear from Dr. Portrip and from Dr. Griffiths. But look, you know, as I looked at the list of attendees, and not just the attendees, but representatives of familiar movements, you know, friends from Kurdistan who taught us about persistence in the face of seemingly impossible odds, colleagues from Catalonia who've been name-checked a few times, who've shown us how to mobilize millions for peaceful change, brothers and sisters from Scotland who have demonstrated how to build a professional, modern independence movement. Each of you, even if you weren't mentioned by name, has contributed to Texas' journey toward independence, whether you realize it or not. And I go back to French philosopher Ernest Renan, who told us that a nation is a soul, a spiritual principle. You know, he understood that nationhood isn't born from borders or bloodlines, but from the daily choice of a people to live together in freedom. In Texas, we've lived this truth since 1836, and I see that same truth reflected in each and every one of your movements. Now, one of our founding fathers here in Texas, Sam Houston, when he and the Texian army stood victorious on the battlefield at San Jacinto, he didn't just win a battle. What he did was he proved what we all know in our hearts, that the will of a people to govern themselves cannot be forever denied. Santa Anna, the dictator of Mexico, had an army of trained soldiers, artillery, and the backing of a powerful central government. The Texians had something more powerful, an unshakable belief in their right of self-government. And I see that same belief in the eyes of every one of you on here today, who've maintained their identity, whose push for self-determination has continued despite centuries sometimes of opposition. And so, you know, I'm reminded of the words of Terence McSweeney, who gave his life for Ireland's independence. And in his book, a collection of essays, Principles of Freedom, he declared, and this is a quote, he said, "Wherever our flag is down, lift it. Wherever it's challenged, wave it. Wherever it's high, salute it." These weren't words for him. You know, he died after a 74-day hunger strike, proving that the spirit of independence cannot be crushed by force. His sacrifice taught us that the price of freedom can be high, but the cost of submission is even higher. Our friends from Tibet understand this price all too well. yet they persist in their peaceful struggle for autonomy while under the thumb of an autocratic totalitarian regime. So, to those of you that are potentially here from Catalonia, your recent experiences with Madrid, as Dr. Griffiths talked about, mirror our own challenges. When we see Spanish authorities attempting to criminalize self-determination, we're reminded here in Texas of how the federal government tries to delegitimize our own movement. Yet, you've shown us how to maintain dignity and purpose, even when faced with state opposition. You know, today in Texas, we face our own challenges. Granted, many of those challenges are not nearly of the scale and scope that some of your movements face, but they are grievances nonetheless. You know, we, in fact, overpay anywhere from $103 to $160 billion annually into the federal system, essentially stealing money from Texas taxpayers to fund wasteful bureaucracy and programs and services that, in fact, are contrary to the values and the wishes of the Texan people. But, you know, it's not about money. It's about control. And so to our friends from Scotland, doesn't this sound familiar? Or frankly, to our friends in Catalonia or many others on here, where they take from your pockets to fund endless bureaucracy or even your own subjugation. For example, like in Scotland, Westminster's control over the North Sea oil revenues. That same bureaucracy that can't count how many agencies it has or how many laws are on its books want to micromanage every aspect of our lives. Now think about that. These governments that typically hold us in chains literally cannot count their own agency or laws, but they claim to have the right to rule over us. And then think about Quebec. Their experience with 2 independence referenda have been invaluable to our planning. You know, you've shown us both what to do and what to avoid. When opponents used Project Fear tactics in 1995, they wrote the playbook that would later be used against Scotland in 2014 and against Brexit in 2016, and is being used against many of us right now. And because you experience those things, we're better prepared to counter these tactics. So inarguably one of the fathers of Italian unification, Massimo d'Azeglio, he understood our shared challenge that we have here when he said, "We made Italy, now we must make Italians." And hat tip to Dr. Quartrup for turning me on to that little piece of wisdom, because he knew that independence isn't just about changing flags, it's about building a shared future. You know, our friends from South Sudan can attest to the importance of this truth. Look at how the Czech Republic and Slovakia separated peacefully, maintaining friendly relations while each pursuing their own path. That's what we want for Texas. Not isolation, but the freedom to choose our own way forward. You know, to the representatives from Somaliland, your success in building a functioning democracy despite lack of recognition inspires all of us. You've shown that good governance doesn't require international recognition. It requires only the will of the people and dedicated leadership. So I leave you with this. If we don't stand for the right of self-determination for one another, we can't stand for our own. When Kurdistan seeks recognition, we must support them. When Catalonia demands a voice in their future, we must amplify their call. When Scotland campaigns for independence, we must stand with them. When California calls for independence, or New Hampshire, or the Western Cape, or any number of independence movements, all of us on here, we have to stand together. And it's not because we agree on every issue. It's because Renan was right. A nation is a daily plebiscite, a constant choice to remain free, and we believe in the right of one another to make that choice. So to our friends, you've shown us how to balance autonomy with practical international relationships. We go on and we talk about these skeptics, and much like you each have your own skeptics, our skeptics love to ask if Texas could survive as an independent nation. So let me answer with facts. Texas has the 8th largest economy in the world. We're the 12th largest technology exporter. We have our own power grid. We rank 40th in global population. We lead the United States in exports, with 93% being manufactured goods. The question is, if Texas can't make it as an independent nation, then who can? But understand, these statistics are not a guarantee of success. Large or small, it doesn't matter. We'll succeed, and many of you will succeed because we have the will to govern ourselves. Going back to McSweeney reminded us that it's not those who can inflict the most, but those who can suffer the most and who will conquer. The Texas Revolution proved this. The Alamo fell, but its spirit sparked a revolution. The Goliad massacre didn't break us. It strengthened our resolve, and at San Jacinto, a force 1/3 the size of Santa Anna's army achieved victory in 18 minutes. And to our friends from West Papua, your peaceful resistance in the face of overwhelming odds embodies this spirit. D'Azeglio's challenge rings true today. We must build nations, not just claim territory. That means establishing courts that serve justice, not political agendas. It means creating a monetary policy that serves our people, not distant bureaucrats. It means securing our borders according to our needs and not the whims of governments far flung from our people. Our colleagues from Vermont, New Hampshire, and California understand these challenges, and we're all seeking to build something better than what we're leaving behind. The critics say we're trying to divide people, but they're wrong. As Renan observed, a nation is therefore a large-scale solidarity, constituted by the feeling of the sacrifices that one has made in the past and of those that one is prepared to make in the future. We're not seeking division. We're seeking the right to choose our own path, to make our own sacrifices, and to build our own future. Supporting self-determination isn't about promoting conflict. It's about recognizing that different people need different solutions. Every journey is unique, but the principle remains the same: the right of a people to choose their own government. Our movements must support each other because we face common challenges. And to succeed, we must share knowledge and resources. Since our founding in 2005, the Texas Nationalist movement has opened its doors to delegates from independence movements worldwide. We've shared our experiences, our strategies, our successes, and yes, our failures, because that's what family does. And make no mistake, those who believe in and fight for the right of self-determination are family. We're bound together by our shared commitment to self-determination. The future belongs to those who believe in the right to self-determination and have the courage to claim it. And together, we can show the world that independence isn't about isolation. It's about authentic cooperation between equals. When Texas stands among the nations again, we'll stand with all peoples seeking their rightful place in the world. The path forward is clear. We must support one another. And so let us leave here today committed not just to our own causes, but to each other's. Let us pledge to support one another, to learn from one another, to stand with one another, because in the end, our success will be measured not just by our individual achievements, but how we helped others achieve their dreams of freedom. And I want to just say this one last thing, Marcus, to everyone here. For those of us who believe in the right of self-government and self-determination, be it take 1 year or 1,000 years, no setback is permanent and no failure is final as long as you never quit. So thank you all. May God bless Texas. May God bless all the people seeking their rightful place among the nations of the earth.
Thank you so much. And I just want to, Professor Griffiths, please start. Professor Ryan Griffiths, the top American expert on independence movements. You just heard from Professor Matt Kubertrup, the top international expert. Now we're going to have the top American expert. That's right, we're bringing the top experts on independence to you at this forum. Professor Ryan Griffiths of Syracuse University.
That's right. That's right. Oh, there you go. That's just, that is a cover image of a book that I have coming out later this summer. I appreciate you guys putting that up there. I'll reference that in a second. Honestly, you don't have to leave it up. You can take it down now, but the title of that book is called The Disunited States, Threats of Red and Blue Secession in America and Why They Won't Work. All right, let me go ahead and I'll talk for a few minutes here. And let me just say, hello to everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. I thank Marc and the organizers for the invitation and for putting this together. I have to say this is really something. Judging from the people here and the program, I'm really hard pressed to think of such a diverse group of secessionists worldwide at the same event. So it's pretty cool to see. It's also nice to see colleagues like Matt here and to learn about his new book, which I didn't know about, but I just put it on my Amazon guest list, and as well as Dr. Leipart. Just briefly about me, I am a scholar who has written about secessionism globally and historically, the long-term patterns, when it works and when it doesn't. As the graphic showed a minute ago, I recently focused my attention on secession in America and have a book coming out later this summer. I should say that I'm a scholar on the subject, not a practitioner, and so for both professional and ethical reasons, I've attempted to remain as neutral as possible when interacting with different movements, with only a few exceptions. So with that, I'm going to make two general points. One is very short and one is fairly lengthy, all right? The short point is that I think that having studied secessionist movements for going on 20 years now, that I think that they are fascinating things to see and quite often beautiful things to observe. These are observations based on fieldwork and interviews with different groups globally in a variety of different settings. I found that there's always a celebration of culture, of camaraderie, of nation, and a sense of hope. They can be quite stirring. So that's the first point, just a recognition, if you will. The second point, and this one is lengthier, a bit more sober, a bit more hard-nosed and analytical. And I should say, I don't mean to dampen the fire of the meeting, but I'll just weigh in on what I think about the project of secession, which is to say, in general terms, it's a long and difficult road. And I think this was communicated to in Marc's comments at the start, as well as in Matt's comments as well. Having studied movements over the last 100 years, back even to the 19th century, there are many secessionist movements, many that we've never heard of, and most fail to achieve their end. So it's not the highest success rate. And let me just be clear. When I talk about secession here, I define this as a process whereby a region in an existing sovereign state separates to form a new recognized independent sovereign state. Okay. By that definition, the last successful secession was South Sudan in 2011. That's a definition that would exclude other forms of separation or even secession that people often talk about, but they're fundamentally different, such as cases like Brexit, right, where a sovereign state separates from some international organization, and also lower level forms of secession, where maybe a part of a municipality separates from one and forms a new city, or part of a federal unit breaks away to join the neighboring one. An example in the American context is the Greater Idaho movement, where some counties in eastern Oregon are seeking to exit Oregon and join the state of Idaho. All right, that's the different form of secession that I'm not talking about. I'm talking about the attempt to form an independent state, which is what most of the efforts here today, I think, are about. And it's not an easy process. Breaking up, I think this is one of the songs Matt talked about. Breaking up is not easy to do. All right, it's hard to do. And a major reason why that it's hard is that the existing set of sovereign states, what I refer to in a book I wrote 2021, I call the Sovereignty Club. They get to determine which state should be recognized. I think this is something that Marc brought up earlier. This is a club that consists of the full United Nations member states, roughly 193. And this is more than just an analogy. This is analytically, there are club-like characteristics here, because a secessionist movement has to apply to that club. Right? You have to put in an application, you literally tender an application to the United Nations that then has to get worked through the Security Council, and there's lots of veto points along the way. And getting into that club is more than just of symbolic value, right? There's very real value to being in that club. It gives an aspiring nation what we call an international legal identity. with which they can do a number of things. They can conduct commerce with other states. They can access financial aid. They can join international organizations. It also affords them a measure of security, of protection, of territorial integrity. All right, these are very real things. And to see, as a point of contrast, there are aspiring states out there that function like states in most ways, like Northern Cyprus or Somaliland, or until about a year and a half ago, Nagorno-Karabakh, that were relegated to were relegated to the margins of international society, but because they cannot get into that club. All right, and that handicaps their functionality. Now, there are many factors that influence how that sovereignty club evaluates an application. And of these, the biggest is the position, or the wishes, if you will, of the sovereign state that has formal legal control over that secessionist region. All right, we'll call this the home state. So for California, the home state is quite obviously the United States of America. For Iraqi Kurdistan, the home state is Iraq. For Tibet, the home state is China. And the wishes of that home state are extremely important because the international community is reluctant, generally reluctant, to recognize a secessionist movement in the absence of its home state's blessing. There are cases where they've gone around it, but it's rare, all right? And therein lies the rub, because that's the way the international system is currently set up. There is, again, as was mentioned earlier, a conservative, a status quo bias to it. It sort of protects the existing set of states. So what that means then is that in the end, every secessionist movement is going to have to deal with its home state. It's going to have to work through it, to convince it, to persuade it, perhaps even coerce it into permitting its independence, right? But sovereign states don't usually like to do this, all right? They may be attached to the territory on an emotional or national level, as the Serbs are with Kosovo, a breakaway region in the south. They may see the territory as too valuable, all right? Perhaps the United States government will be reluctant to give up on certain key territories because of the resources, etc. But I think most importantly, when governments respond to secessionist demands, they have to be aware of the potential for precedent setting, all right? And that is, by permitting the secession of one region, they may encourage or green light, if you will, the secession of other regions, and thereby open the door to their own dissolution. This is a problem that many countries face. It's an issue that would hold in a secessionist effort among the federal units of the United States. And it's clearly a motive behind numerous government responses to domestic secession across a range of countries. In Spain, one of the reasons Spain responded to Catalonia as they did is because of concerns over precedent setting. Or Russia or Indonesia, countries that face lots of potential secessionist movements. So that precedent-setting problem is a real obstacle, all right? So given all that, what works? What increases the odds of a successful secession? Well, when the region in question has a defined administrative territory, or there are clear lines that separate it from the rest of the country, that really helps. And if that administrative region has some distinct or unique status that is recognized, that is sort of perceived as salient among the domestic population, such that its secession isn't something that should be extended to all other regions of the country. All right. So, for example, Puerto Rico is not a sovereign independent state. It's formally part of the United States. It has a special status. But should it become independent, its special status isn't something that we should expect the rest of the United States to point to and say, hey, if Puerto Rico should become independent, then that means we should be able to become independent too, because it has a unique status. And there are recent examples of secessionist efforts that qualify for this special status. In the South Pacific, New Caledonia has had referenda in recent years. Matt mentioned Bougainville. He's been very involved with them. They had a referendum a few years back. But even there, secession remains elusive for both of those regions. So the bottom line is that this is a difficult process. Those who get to the promised land of sovereign independence are not necessarily the most righteous or the most fit. There's a fair bit of luck and sometimes even, unfortunately, a fair bit of conflict. All right. But they nonetheless are very fascinating efforts and beautiful efforts to see. So I'll close by wishing all of you good luck in your own independence projects. So thank you.
I want to say thank you to Professor Ryan Griffiths, the top American expert on independence. Thank you to Professor Kuvertrup, the top international expert on referendums. And thank you to Professor Aren Liebhardt for participating. He wrote a book on comparing democratic systems across, I believe, 36 different countries. It was the most extensive book of its kind. We're going to go to Daniel Miller. I do have to just point out a few facts. In the 1930s and the 1990s, they had something that they called the Springtime of Nations. Basically, a bunch of new nations were formed, and no experts predicted that. It largely happened around 1917 to the 1925 as the aftermath of World War I. With the Soviet Union collapse, no one predicted that, I think, except for Estonia. So while there are large periods where stability is the case, in the last 200 years, there's been these occasional just explosions that nobody predicted. It happened, and there was multiple independence movements of that. So that kind of happens sometimes. Also, when we look at the fact of East Timor and Sudan, South Sudan, initially when they were proposed, people didn't think that that was going to be pulled off, especially East Timor. That was a very hard one, and that did get pulled off despite what the experts did. I'd also point out Brexit. Nobody thought Brexit was going to happen. And then they said when it did happen, England would collapse into the ocean, its dollar would collapse, nobody would be part of it, it'd lose all of its alliances. It had a tough time, but none of those predictions happened. So there are some ebbs and flows. Also, when we look at California, the fact is that 32% of Californians said they embraced full-blown automatic let's get out secession with the election of Trump in 2016. No expert predicted that. No one. And in fact, what happened was the World Economic Forum, the top forum for the 1%ers who run the entire planet, immediately had a conference on should we be prepared for California being independent. So yes, there's a lot of difficulties. One of the people that I've interviewed was Professor Bridget Coggins out of the University of Santa Barbara, I believe. She wrote the definitive book on recognition of nations. I believe the book is called, I have the title here. Well, it's basically Bridget Coggins on international recognition of nations. And she says there are rules, but when you look at it over the last 100 years, it's a grab bag. Some people make it who should, some people make it who shouldn't. It's kind of up in the air. We'll leave it there. Let's go to Daniel Miller. Daniel Miller from the Texas Nationalist movement. There. So let's go to Emily Peyton.
Yes.
Emily from Vermont.
Yes.
Please.
Well, thank you, and thank you for organizing this, and thank you for being here. Thank you, everybody. And I want to speak briefly about the quality of freedom. And the quality of freedom is about responsibility for behaving with alignment to our authority. And the only authority that we have is that which we are inspired to have from Source or God. We all have the authority, and it is how are we going to move into the freedom that we need, the responsibility for our planet. And I think we're in a really wonderful time now that we haven't been in before, because now the people of the planet, there's a great awakening. There's people who know that they don't want to belong to wrongdoing on the level that we've had before. And now here are the people in this room, the trailblazers, the people who resonate with freedom because it's authentic. it's more important to be free to the people in this conference than it is to belong and be safe. And we are the trailblazers. Now, let me say about myself. I am the daughter of a composer who himself seceded from an infamous DuPont family. And he decided to compose and create art. And I am the middle of 5 daughters, and I have effectively seceded from academia and seceded from success as greed. So where I have gone with my life is to look how do we create a planet? How do we create a planet that can live in peace? And how can we repair our planet? Because to me, the trees, the water, the birds, the animals, they are equal beings that we need to live honorably with. So I ran for governor 5 times. Before that, I composed for a decade. And throughout all this, I've been studying the difference between corporate law and God's law, natural law or common law. And I want to bring up something about our founding fathers, particularly Benjamin Franklin. I think it's important to say. The founding fathers were incredibly influenced by the Iroquois nation. And those were people who had lived as independent tribes peacefully for 800 years. And they took many of their principles and brought them into our documents. And as Americans, we are very lucky to have our documents. That being said, some of the things that the Iroquois had did not come over. Now, the Iroquois had special standing for the grandmothers. It was the grandmothers who decided when we went to war, because the grandmothers were the ones who knew the value of life that we were putting at risk. It was the grandmothers who chose the chieftains, because grandmothers could see the value, the quality of the characters that they chose. Now, what happened with America is the founding fathers did not give standing to the women to bring their voices and their wisdom forward. And we have an imbalance because of it. So I want to bring you to what I've been working on. After running for governor for 5 times, I had an intuition because I had been a composer. I knew how to listen. And I got an intuition about how we can structure ourselves economically, because it is important to recognize the master of the globe. It's been spoken of it. It are the money masters. We are all controlled by those who control our currency. So what I've been working with is I've gathered a team of people. I've vetted this. This came from source. It came from God, this plan. And you can find it on alliance.land. You can go there, or edensbay.earth. Let me try to bring you into it. What we have is we have a great awakening of humanity. And what I call that is the Great Alliance. Now we need to get the empowerment of a currency that those who are humane and who believe in the capacity for us to be free and be peaceful and sovereign in and of ourselves. We need to have a means to do commerce, to do trading that isn't controlled by debt. We can no longer be debt enslaved. So even though I come from Vermont, which is the first state in the nation to abolish slavery, it abolished it in 1777, but it got accepted into the Union in 1791 with it in its constitution. And yet we are the most compliant state. We have such a high tax burden, and all that is what it is. But so what I have designed is an alliance, and I'm working with a team, the Alliance Foundation, and everybody can be a member of the alliance and design their own cause, their own group within the alliance. And what we simply do is we bring our public currency into a membership that we can afford. And then what the alliance does is it offers a pool of money for people who are in the alliance to spend into the whatever their needs are, and to do it not as debt. This is what's so important, because the Iroquois people and people who live in peace don't live in debt to one another. So we need a bridge to go forward where we can establish means to circulate enough currency for all our needs. There's no reason for any shortage of currency. So we call that the allied coin. And when the organizational structure has it such that any group of people that wants to organize a chapter of the alliance, it can be, we're an international organization. You are able to call together members, and we will support you. I had a PowerPoint, but I'm going off PowerPoint to make it easier for you, which is what women have to do, right? We have to make it easy for men. So what we're doing is, if you'll go to alliance.land, you'll be able to connect with any one of the founding trustees. Then we will show you how to organize so that you eventually will have a pool of money. Now, let me be clear. The power of numbers is huge, and humanity is arising. We are all brothers and sisters. We are all connected. Matakio say, we are all connected. And so when we all contribute a small amount, let's say there is a contribution of $35 a month, and then we get something in return. We get allied coin in return. And we exchange the allied coins with any of our alliance members. Meanwhile, we pool the currency. And then what we do is, once we have a pool that's grown, we propose how to spend it. We rank our proposals. This gives everybody a voice. This proposal enactment governance allows us to have a republic. By the way, we have a republic, not a democracy. We have democratic voices included, but we always select leaders for different things. So we do need leadership. We do need to be able to, but what we, the people, need to do is to have the authority to distribute the money for the things that we need to do. So what I come here offering is a structure that will serve everybody in their own independent causes, whether it's by region or whether it's by nation. Because if we are not able to do commerce together, or if we are, when we are able to fund one another, when we are able to have the economic power, that's the power that the humane amongst us need to be able to repair this planet. And we're up against a deadline. This planet needs us. So thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Jason. Thank you for having me.
I want to say thank you to Emma. Perfect.
You on me?
Yeah. Yep, you're framed. He's
Okay.
from Florida.
Florida.
Why does Florida need to be independent, Keith, from Florida?
Well, it's the first answer to that question. You've just heard 10 answers to that question, I think, here. We're going to hear 10 more. And I'll go through it. I'll talk about it specifically in Florida a little more detail. But I think overall, you're hearing a lot of the same story. It's about oppression from some central government. And the way that our central government's formed is all similar. It's somebody combined a bunch of different peoples, a bunch of different nations, a bunch of different states, But I hear at a top level, I'm hearing the same story. And interestingly, it's over and over, we hear it's from the British. And nothing against Britain today, or England today, but yeah, go back a few hundred years to the British Empire. That seems to be a key to this story. As there's a little side, and again, this isn't a dig on Britain, but average once a day, some country in the world celebrates its independence from Great Britain. And I think a few people here were talking about that. Anyway, as far as Florida goes, back to Florida specifically, often just start talking about numbers. This is kind of a practical question. So I'm going to spend 1 minute on Florida numbers. So Florida GDP is 1.3 trillion. As an independent country, it would be number 17 in the world. The population's 23 million. It'd be number 57 in the world. Size-wise, it'd be about 120. It's got 10 major seaports. One advantage Florida has as independent. It's got 1,350 miles of coastline. Very hard to blockade Florida. Jacksonville, Tampa Bay is the biggest, 33 million tons a year. So there's a lot of sea trade out of Florida, in and out of Florida. It's got 2 of the biggest top 10 airports in the United States for shipping and travel. 8 billion a year in farm sales, 65 billion a year in manufacturing. It's the #1 state in the U.S. for tourism. So kind of the numbers just say Florida would be in the middle of the road in the wide range worldwide in countries. But the overall question as far as numbers, I'd like to think, do the numbers matter? The answer is no. The numbers don't matter, not on the question of the right to secession. So state, U.S. state, and any peoples, we have the right to secede, right to form our own government. So for states, for U.S. states, it's constitutional, it's lawful, and most importantly, it's moral for a state to decide to leave the Union on their own accord. It's up to the state. And the same moral ground answer applies to some of the other groups here, like Western Togoland, like Biafra, like Vermont. It's all the same question, really, because self-governance, self-determination, it's a natural right. So the question is, if people want to decide to leave, they can. The elevator pitch on this, I can't say it any better than Thomas Jefferson did. I'm going to read it, make sure I get it exactly right, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. That applies to everybody. Often it comes up, can DC stop us lawfully? Do they have the legitimate power to end a secession, to stop it? The answer is no. DC holds no such constitutional power, no legal power, no lawful power, no moral power. Can they stop it by force? Now, of course, the bigger guy can always try to stop it by force, but violence never answers a constitutional question or a legal question or a moral question. As David Friedman pointed out, violence is such a poor answer to problems that it's only used generally by small children and large governments. That's David Friedman. Anybody who objects to the right of secession today, I like to point out that in the United States, you've been on the side of King George in 1776. It's the same question, has the same answer for people that are rationally consistent. As former president of my state said, Jefferson Davis, a forced union is a political absurdity. So if the union is held together by force, it's not a union. We all know what the word union means. That's not what a union is. I want to just touch on like the concept of liberty and decentralization versus unification. So what we see in the United States, in Nigeria, as she brought up, you see this centralization of power where peoples are combined, nations are combined, groups are combined, states are combined in the United States. A great example of this is Germany. So in the 17th century, Germany had 234 countries, 51 free cities, and 1,500 independent nightly manors. Tom Woods brought this up in a Mises Institute talk many years ago. I still follow this one. Eventually, by 1871, we had German unification. So it went to that wide, decentralized area and then became unified. And so the question you have to ask is, say Hitler got elected to be the mayor, governor of the city-state of Linz, where he was from in Austria. Like, what could he have really accomplished? if there was still 1,500 independent nightly manors in 234 separate countries that made up what eventually became the German Empire. So that's just look at what centralization did versus what unification did versus decentralization. So to me, the solution of these problems that everybody's been talking about, it's decentralization. It's to end the relationship. In the United States case, we would secede from the Union, peacefully walk away. I look for a definition of this, and it's hard to find one because people manipulate the definitions for what it is, but ChatGPT was a great one. They said, secession is the act of formally withdrawing from membership of an organization, federation, or political entity. That's what we're talking about when we talk about secession. So secession, number one, is not rebellion. It's nothing to do with rebellion. It's not treason. That's not what either of those words mean. Secession is peaceful. Secession is always peaceful. So any force, any violence, any war that comes in response to secession, it's always because some tyrannical aggressor objects to losing control. It may be losing control of people, land, resources, but they're losing control, and that's why war happens. The key to liberty is decentralization. Now, in 1900, there were 78 countries worldwide. Now there's about 196, depending on how you count. You count the Vatican, but went from 78 to roughly 196. Europe's countries doubled in the last century. And almost all of these happened because of peaceful secession. It wasn't a war. The Soviet Union broke up. When I was a kid, if anybody said the Soviet Union is going to peacefully break up because Latvia and Estonia are just going to secede and say, I don't want to be part of this anymore, people would have said, you're crazy. Like, that could never happen. Yet that's what happened. So if America can't break up, if Florida can't leave the Union, if any state in the United States doesn't want to walk away, then what you're saying is that Washington, D.C. is more powerful, more tyrannical than the Soviet Union was under Joseph Stalin and Vladimir Lenin. Like, is that what you really think? Maybe it's true. But anyway, I think the Soviet Union broke up peacefully. All empires end eventually. History of all the world shows that empires end eventually. They all collapse. They always have. So there's no reason to think that this particular one won't collapse eventually. And watching what DC's doing, it sure looks like it's going to collapse. When it'll happen, I wouldn't predict. But my opinion is that getting out before the collapse will be better than waiting until the end. I don't think we should wait till the end. So everybody knows what DC is doing to us, the imperial city. Ask yourself the question, if you're pondering this one, are we in a good, satisfying, mutually beneficial relationship with DC? It is really the same as the marriage. So I have to credit Daniel Miller for first asking this question of me, but would you support joining the United States now as a new member state? So if you were independent, would you voluntarily become a member of the empire ruled by the imperial city of Washington? Would you choose to be ruled by all the administrative agencies and their 90,402 pages of rules and regulations? I wouldn't do that. You want to be ruled by presidential executive orders, the Supreme Court, a bunch of politically connected lawyers, their opinion, lobby interests, and all their money. By that, I mean Congress. I wouldn't choose to be subject to federal taxes or 37 trillion in debt funding continuous wars. I'm going to end it with something from the Declaration of Independence. This is another quote. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out our substance. That's why I think we should leave. Thanks.
Wow, well done, well done. We're going to go to Stephen. So Stephen is from New Hampshire, and he has been an advocate for New Hampshire independence for quite a while. He's well-spoken, well-educated on it. Stephen, why does New Hampshire need to become independent, sir?
All right, so I'm going to be the dissenting view here. I'm actually not going to argue that New Hampshire needs to secede, but I'm going to argue that I hope it does eventually. My views are going to be quite different from a lot of what I'm hearing here.
Please.
Okay. What's special about New Hampshire? It is the home of the Free State Project. Many of you have heard of it. It's a movement to try to get libertarians from all over to move to New Hampshire to make the state government more libertarian. I was one of the earliest movers 21 years ago now. So many free staters support secession, not all of them, but many of them do. And there are, by my count, at least 6 organizations advocating for New Hampshire secession. I am the founder of one of them. It's called the Club 75 Alliance. So Club 75 refers to people whose income is $75,000 or more. That group makes up 29% of taxpayers, but they're paying 90% of all federal income tax. And I am encouraging them, along with people who just don't like income tax for whatever reason, to concentrate themselves in New Hampshire and then negotiate peaceful secession. So the aims are somewhat similar to the Free State Project, but we're focused on freeing ourselves from federal income tax with that specific goal. So again, my view is going to be very different. The usual view about secession is there's no hope of ever negotiating. It's like a pipe dream trying to negotiate with the federal government. Therefore, our only option is unilateral secession, which means we declare independence and kind of hope for the best. My view is just the opposite, that the federal government, not only do they have this huge army, but they are also very good at spin. They can easily paint us out to be dangerous radicals who need to be put down by force. So I don't want to make an enemy of the federal government. I want to negotiate. What I ultimately want is a U.S. constitutional amendment that allows any state to secede. So that way, all of you, or at least the ones in the United States, can secede without having to do this fight thing. That is what I would like to see. And I think the way to do that, the key point is you don't start by talking to the federal government. That's the last thing you do. The first thing you do is win over the hearts and minds of the American people. And the way you do that is the same way advertisers get anything across, is you convey a message which is not offensive, and then you repeat it over and over and over. That's how all advertising works. So we want to convince people that secession is a good thing. That means I don't want to talk about how the federal government is tyrannical or abusive or whatever. That may all be true, but it's not the way to win over the average Joes out there. I just want to say, in the case of New Hampshire, I want to say, look, we want small government here in New Hampshire. You all like big government here. That's all fine. Secession allows us to have the small government we want. The other 49 states keep the big government they want. Everybody's happy and we can all stay friends. So when I'm talking to people about secession, I like to start with July 4th, and I'm going to allude to a few things that Keith said. We were born out of secession, obviously. And that already, so July 4th is, we're celebrating the secession of the American colonies from Britain. And that already gets people to think that at least in some cases, secession is a good thing. At least in certain cases, secession leads to a positive result. And it also gives us talking points for discussions with people who oppose secession. So if somebody opposes the secession of Texas or California or Florida or New Hampshire, whatever their specific objection, imagine that King George had made a similar argument. For example, we get a lot of people saying, well, if you don't like America, you're welcome to leave. You're welcome to move to Somalia or some other part of the world. But the United States government owns that land in Florida or Texas or whatever. And so no secession for you. So then imagine that King George had similarly said, hey, you colonists, so sorry to hear that you don't consent to our government. And you all are welcome to move to some other part of the world, but the British Crown owns that land. The British Crown owns Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, so no secession for you. Would that have been a valid moral argument? Okay, so now suppose somebody says, well, 200 something years ago, secession might have been reasonable, but in modern society, it doesn't make sense. Well, let's take a look at some secessions that have happened in modern times, like in the last 40 years or so. East Timor, as somebody mentioned, seceded from Indonesia. Eritrea seceded from Ethiopia. Obviously, Bosnia seceded from Yugoslavia. That was got quite a bit of press because it happened in Europe. But all of those secessions eventually were recognized by the United Nations. So presumably you would agree those secessions were justified. So I want to get people, the American public, and really world leaders everywhere to think long and hard about this question. In view of all that, when is secession justified and when is it not? And in the cases where it is justified, can we please, pretty please, let it happen without a war? Like the Bosnian War, 100,000 people were killed, 40,000 of them civilians. Couldn't we skip that step and just go straight to, okay, you peacefully secede? Okay, one other thing we get is people saying, well, you're trying to destroy the United States. Well, that's not true. So like when East Timor seceded from Indonesia, did that destroy Indonesia? Of course not. When Ireland seceded from the UK, did that destroy the UK? No. We want to make the case that actually secession, not only is it a good thing, but it can actually make the parent country, or as Professor Griffiths said, the home country, stronger. Because the people who don't want to be there are now out, and the people who remain, presumably they are the patriotic ones, they will actually make the home country stronger. There are some cases, as they've been alluded to, about where we've done it peacefully, where secession has been done peacefully. The big example, of course, is the independence of India. Mahatma Gandhi insisted on doing it peacefully with using nonviolent techniques. Somebody mentioned the velvet divorce of Czechoslovakia. And of course, Brexit, which, as Professor Griffiths pointed out, the European Union is not a sovereign nation, so it doesn't really count as a secession, but a lot of the points are still there. If they are still, the European Union was still imposing laws on Britain, and so they wanted to be free. All right, what else to do? Okay, well, let me just point out, okay, there's a valid secession, there needs to be a majority, a clear majority who wants a secession. That implies that there's a minority who do not want secession, and it's important to accommodate them reasonably. I call them the loyalists, people who want to remain loyal to the home country or the parent country. That's a big subject that's going to take more time than I have left. But please visit my website, Club 75 Alliance. That's Club 75 Alliance, all one word.com, where I give that whole manifesto there as an example of how to make a radical proposal without offending.
Thank you, Stephen, so much. We're going to go to Jack Miller, and then we're going to come back and go to Alaska, and then Western Togoland. And then everybody from New England, I see you. We're going to get to you right after that. So I see you. Thank you, New England, for coming out. So we're going to go to Jack Miller from South Africa. Then we're going to go to Alaska, Western Togoland, and then New England, promise. And then we'll go from there. We will make sure to get everybody involved. I promise you. So let's go to Jack Miller. Jack Miller, you're from South Africa. Why does the Cape region of South Africa deserve to be independent?
Well, Mark, thank you very much. The Cape deserves to be independent for pretty much every single reason your professor spoke about earlier and more. We tick all the boxes. But before I get into that, I just want to give a brief introduction to myself and our movement, if some of your listeners aren't aware. My name is Jack Miller from the Cape Independence Party. And we were founded in 2007. So we've been fighting for secession, self-determination, and in the interim, greater decentralization for the last 18 years. As of the last 2021 elections, we've got 2 seats in the government here in South Africa, in the city of Cape Town, and we are going and growing from strength to strength. Before I get into the details of why the Cape should be an independent country, I think it's very important, considering the events over the last few weeks, for me to say a few thank yous. And first of all, I just want to say thank you to yourself, Marc and Jason, for putting this event together. Calexit is a movement which we all have tremendous respect for. And I've got tremendous respect for many of the other secession movements, which I've had the honor and pleasure of engaging with over the last year or so. And I look forward to engaging with many more secession movements around the world and building friendships and building working relationships to continue in the spirit of what Daniel Miller said earlier. So, and in addition to that, I would like to send out a huge thank you on behalf of the Cape Independence Movement and South Africans as a whole who are under the persecution of the South African government and the ANC in particular. A thank you to the American people and the outpouring of support that we've received over the last few weeks. And that would only be possible because of a South African who you guys stole from us, who happens to be the wealthiest man in the world, Elon Musk, as well as your President Donald J. Trump. And between Elon Musk and President Trump, they've really brought attention to some of the most horrific goings on here in South Africa. And I'll be touching on some of those issues. So secession is not just something that we believe would be a preferable pathway for us here in the Cape to take, but we believe based on the extreme tensions and the direction that the ANC and parties like the EFF are taking this country, secession is inevitable. When a centralized state works to build cohesive relationships with the various territories under its control, then secession becomes less and less likely. But when a centralized state goes out of its way to ostracize, to isolate, to persecute a group of people, a territory, minorities, in our case here in the Cape, we're a majority, then they are only doing themselves a disservice and pushing us towards a higher and higher likelihood of achieving independence. The most obvious reason why the Cape should be independent is economic. We pay approximately 260 billion rand in taxes to the South African government annually. On our local and provincial allocation, we get back a total of 60 billion rand. We are losing direct access to 75% of the revenue that we produce in our province here in the Western Cape. We're one of the most productive provinces. And if we were independent, without even changing these bad communist, socialist policies and racist policies, we would overnight be able to cut taxes in half and at the same time have double the resources available to us for infrastructure, schools, hospitals, policing, etc. We have a tremendous agriculture industry, wine export, tourism, fishing, tertiary and technology economy. We consistently perform better than the rest of South Africa in terms of education and manufacturing and various other services. And here in the Western Cape, we've never, ever once voted for the national government. Not once has the Western Cape voted for the ANC in the last 30 years that the ANC has been in power in South Africa. We've consistently voted for parties other than them. At the current stage of affairs, there's a party called the Democratic Alliance, or the DA, who is seen as the opposition to the ANC, and they've won the elections here for the last 2 decades. Whether they're a real opposition or not, we don't believe they are, and I'll get into some of those issues later. But people vote for them nonetheless because they would rather have the DA than the ANC. But when we've conducted polling and other organizations have conducted polling, the numbers are resounding. 68% of the Western Cape wants a referendum on Cape independence. Of that number, 58% are adamant that the Cape should be independent. And these percentages link up quite nicely with our demographics. And the majority language spoken in the Cape is a language called Afrikaans. And it's a very special language because it's been formed over hundreds of years. And it's an amalgamation between Dutch and Indonesian and Malaysian and English and Khoi and San and the various influences of the people which made this unique language. Since 1652, and from that seminal moment, we've developed a culture and a history and a people that have lived together, have intermarried, and have given birth to the largest population group in the Cape, which personally refer to themselves as Cape Colored. I understand that term isn't understood in other parts of the world, but you could understand them as brown Afrikaners. So here in the Cape, we have white Afrikaners, we have brown Afrikaners, we have Indian Afrikaners. The language Afrikaans is almost the defining backbone of what makes the Cape unique to the rest of South Africa, and in fact, the rest of the African continent. Marc, if it's possible to bring up some of those images I sent through to you earlier, then my words might make a bit more sense to the American audience and the international audience. Do you have those there? So you can see where exactly the Cape is.
I'm still working
the language
on that.
distribution is different to the rest of the country.
I'm still working on that. Let me try on that right now.
Hold on, what's happening here?
I might not be able to get the graphics up. Is that okay?
Sorry, Marc, my volume was down there. Sorry, are you able to bring up those images, or should I try?
I'm not. Unfortunately, I'm not able to bring up the images. Sorry about that.
That's something I could be working on there.
Sorry?
Don't worry about it. We need to just finish this speech and move on. Sorry about that.
Nope, no problem whatsoever. So basically, the territory which we call home it's about the size of France. It includes the entire Western Cape. It also includes a province called the Northern Cape, a few wards and municipalities in the Free State, as well as the Eastern Cape. In this territory, 70% of that population speaks Afrikaans. I'm going to branch off into something which we don't always like to talk about because it's a very unpleasant part of what's happening in South Africa at the moment. Some people refer to it as genocide. Depending on how you choose to look at the numbers, you can draw those conclusions. Other people say no, that the deaths of Boere and white Afrikaans farmers are not genocide proportions, and it's just that the murder rate is so bad throughout the country. But let's just go through those numbers quickly, and just to confirm that the concerns that Elon Musk has raised and President Trump has raised are in fact correct. In America, you guys have a murder rate of 5 per 100,000. India has a murder rate of 8.2 per 100,000. Israel has a murder rate of 2.4 per 100,000. Australia 1.7, Switzerland 0.8, Japan 0.5. The average murder rate in the whole of South Africa ranges anywhere between 35 and 45 murders per 100,000. Our police officers suffer a murder rate of around 60 per 100,000. So to put that into perspective, war zones like Iraq had a murder rate of around 40 per 100,000, Yemen 61 per 100,000, Somalia 34 per 100,000, Syria at its peak was 139 per 100,000. Now, to put into perspective how white Afrikaans farmers are being murdered, they have a murder rate of approximately 150 per 100,000. This is worse than most war zones around the world. And these people aren't just being killed with a bullet in the head and stealing their tractor. They are tied up, elderly women and children. It's horrific to say this, but the world needs to know they're tortured, they are raped. They are, this takes place over hours and hours and hours. Messages with their blood is written on the walls. And we have politicians in South Africa singing songs saying, kill die Boere, kill the white farmers. And nothing is done to give any, at least political pushback against these murders. And we're just absolutely grateful that the American people over the last few weeks have become aware of this. And it is yet another strong driving force behind why the Cape should become independent. Here in the Cape, we do not suffer as badly as other parts of South Africa when it comes to farm murders. The worst of the farm murders are in the ANC strongholds, the territories outside of the Cape. But we certainly, Cape independence would go a long way towards bringing stability to South Africa, putting an end to the tyranny of the racist and fascist communist government that is the ANC and EFF. And we look forward to working together with all the other secession movements around here in achieving all of our goals and bringing peace and prosperity to our parts of the world, and we'll do our best to support you and your movements in your parts of the world. Thank you very much.
Okay, perfect. That's Alaska right there. So let's go to Alaska. John, you're from Alaska. Why does Alaska need to be independent? Who are you, and why does Alaska need to be independent?
We need to be independent so that so we can have a better shake at things. You listen to some of these other people, and some of these places are definitely doing worse than we are. There's an economic dictatorship that's going on the whole world over. And you can't fix it with a phony money. You can't fix it with gold hidden away in Fort Knox, even if you have it counted. Because it's hidden away in Fort Knox. Might as well not exist. But getting back to the more basics here, let's go back 500 years ago, because I don't want to go to too wrong in history. But in Alaska, there were a whole bunch of free people, mostly families. They didn't really, there were some that were tribes and had chiefs, but if things were too bothersome with one of the chiefs, move off a few miles. No big deal. They were pretty much all free people. Well, down in America, that's how we call it a lot of times, America, sometimes just the lower 48 or lesser 48. But down in the lower 48, in the East Coast, there was a similar situation. They had, but some of them were bigger tribes too. They had chiefs that were oppressive to people. They had things that were not that great, all of them. They weren't all wonderful. But there were also just groups that were families, period. In came the Europeans, and with the Europeans was technology. It was a wonderful melding of the freedom and technology. And they started doing things that people had never done before with the technology, instead of just paying obedience to the king. The kings that previous to this, people had asked for kings so that they could go out to war against other people and gain more without working for it. They went out to wars, they had knights, they were organizations for war. That was their whole purpose. Then we had a situation of those like, let's take George Washington, for instance. George Washington was a warrior for the King of England before he decided to go the other way. There were 13 areas that were set up by the King of England, and the King of England said, you can have this ground, and this ground. And they decided one day that they wanted, well, several days, that they wanted freedom. Part of it was pushed on by the individual people, but the final movement was when the city seat decided, when the light went on for them, these people want freedom. We got all these people that threw this tea in the harbor in Boston, and these people want freedom. We have a choice. We're either going to get our throats cut, or we're going to go with them. You know, and maybe not throats cut, maybe just thrown out. But so they decided to go along with the people, and they threw out the king. But as soon as the king was thrown out with the help of the people, they said, we have to reorganize. This confederation that we had, where we loosely were held together in each of these areas, was not a big enough control together. Was both good and bad. It was good because some of these 13 independent nation states had oppression upon their people. There were individual things that should be given to every human being that were not for some of them. So that was good. But they also wanted this so that they could have more control as a federal group. And when you read the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers, which are not what people always think they are, but they were discussions for and against the Constitution of the U.S. as it was written, as you read those, one of the first things that they sought to find was an appropriate way to select a replacement for the king. Not an appropriate way to do without a king, but an appropriate way to select a replacement for the king. Their ideas were to be dictated to. And there are many ways that they looked at. Of course, they looked at republics, which is a fancy word for saying somebody else is going to represent you, or an individual dictator if it's only one person that is heading the republic. Democracy, where everybody votes for what's going on. And then they got down to where they could have had some real freedom, but they decided, and the biggest thing they wanted was taxes. So they imposed obedience on the people, the same as what the king had put on them before. And to get a really free society, you have to get away from this obedience to the capital, to the big guy. Let's get back to Alaska for a second. The U.S. came in after Russia was there initially just trading. U.S. came in, made agreements with, wanted to make agreements over the top of the people. Initially, the native people that were there could not own land when America was first a territory with Alaska. They couldn't own land there. They couldn't own mining claims. Several of the other people that were allowed to own claims would own gold claims with them. Some of them stole them from them. Some of them stole lands. Then there were native claims. With the native claims, there's a little over 200 groups that were broke up into various tribes and villages and corporations, some good, some terrible. But every one of these has the idea of getting its power from the federal government. Not from God, not from the people, from the federal government. We've made some little fiefdoms here and there, which don't really help us give the independence that we should have. But we also, while Alaska was taken over by, and I got to get back, I know I'm running out of time. So yeah, okay. The big thing was also when there was a vote, and that was agreed upon with the United Nations, there was a vote that they would ask for, does Alaska want to become a state, remain a territory, a commonwealth, or a free nation? That was supposed to be offered to Alaska, Puerto Rico, and Hawaii. Puerto Rico was the only one that got it. And my point here being, if they go out in the same way and purchase from the traders with Greenland, the Denmark people that are trading with them and don't really have, or maybe do, some legal right, make sure they give you all 4 options, not just 2, to become a territory oppressed or a state oppressed. The number 1 plank of the Alaskan Independence Party, which I am the state chairman of, the number 1 is independence for all individual Alaskans through any peaceful and lawful means. And I say peaceful, if you go back and you see any time that there's been a war, just like there was with the Revolutionary War with the U.S., when they got done, did they have a more free society than Canada had for several years? No. No. War does not equal freedom.
Oh, you're ending there. That's brilliant. I didn't know you're ending there. That's awesome. Okay. Thank you, Alaska. We're going to go to Edwin from Western Togo. So let's go to Alaska. John, you're from Alaska. Why does Alaska need to be independent? Who are you, and why does Alaska need to be independent?
We need to be independent so that so we can have a better shake at things. You listen to some of these other people, and some of these places are definitely doing worse than we are. There's an economic dictatorship that's going on the whole world over. And you can't fix it with a phony money. You can't fix it with gold hidden away in Fort Knox, even if you have it counted, because it's hidden away in Fort Knox. Might as well not exist. But getting back to the more basics here, let's go back 500 years ago, because I don't want to go to too wrong in history. But in Alaska, there were a whole bunch of free people, mostly families. There were some that were tribes and had chiefs, but if things were too bothersome with one of the chiefs, move off a few miles. No big deal. They were pretty much all free people. Well, down in America, that's how we call it a lot of times, America, sometimes just the lower 48 or lesser 48. But down in the lower 48, in the East Coast, there was a similar situation. But some of them were bigger tribes too. They had chiefs that were oppressive to people. They had things that were not that great, all of them. They weren't all wonderful. But there were also just groups that were families, period. In came the Europeans, and with the Europeans was technology. It was a wonderful melding of the freedom and technology. And they started doing things that people had never done before with the technology, instead of just paying obedience to the king. The kings that previous to this, people had asked for kings so that they could go out to war against other people and gain more without working for it. They went out to wars, they had knights, they were organizations for war. That was their whole purpose. Then we had a situation of those like, let's take George Washington, for instance. George Washington was a warrior for the King of England before he decided to go the other way. There were 13 areas that were set up by the King of England, and the King of England said, you can have this ground, and this ground. And they decided one day that they wanted, well, several days, that they wanted freedom. Part of it was pushed on by the individual people, but the final movement was when the city seat decided, when the light went on for them, these people want freedom. We got all these people that threw this tea in the harbor in Boston, and these people want freedom. We have a choice. We're either going to get our throats cut, or we're going to go with them. You know, and maybe not throats cut, maybe just thrown out. But so they decided to go along with the people, and they threw out the king. But as soon as the king was thrown out with the help of the people, they said, we have to reorganize. This confederation that we had, where we loosely were held together in each of these areas, was not a big enough control together. It was both good and bad. It was good because some of these 13 independent nation states had oppression upon their people. There were individual things that should be given to every human being that were not for some of them. So that was good. But they also wanted this so that they could have more control as a federal group. And when you read the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers, which are not what people always think they are, but they were discussions for and against the Constitution of the U.S. as it was written, as you read those, one of the first things that they sought to find was an appropriate way to select a replacement for the king. Not an appropriate way to do without a king, but an appropriate way to select a replacement for the king. Their ideas were to be dictated to. And there are many ways that they looked at. Of course, they looked at republics, which is a fancy word for saying somebody else is going to represent you, or an individual dictator if it's only one person that is heading the republic. Democracy, where everybody votes for what's going on. And then they got down to where they could have had some real freedom, but they decided, and the biggest thing they wanted was taxes. So they imposed obedience on the people, the same as what the king had put on them before. And to get a really free society, you have to get away from this obedience to the capital, to the big guy. let's get back to Alaska for a second. The U.S. came in after Russia was there initially just trading. U.S. came in, made agreements with, wanted to make agreements over the top of the people. Initially, the native people that were there could not own land when America was first a territory with Alaska. They couldn't own land there. They couldn't own mining claims. Several of the other people that were allowed to own claims would own gold claims with them. Some of them stole them from them. Some of them stole lands. Then there were native claims. With the native claims, there's a little over 200 groups that were broke up into various tribes and villages and corporations, some good, some terrible. But every one of these has the idea of getting its power from the federal government. Not from God, not from the people, from the federal government. We've made some little fiefdoms here and there, which don't really help us give the independence that we should have. But we also, while Alaska was taken over by, I gotta get back, I know I'm running out of time. So yeah, okay. The big thing was also when there was a vote, and that was agreed upon with the United Nations, there was a vote that they would ask for, does Alaska want to become a state, remain a territory, a commonwealth, or a free nation? That was supposed to be offered to Alaska, Puerto Rico, and Hawaii. Puerto Rico was the only one that got it. And my point here being, if they go out in the same way and purchase from the traders with Greenland, the Denmark people that are trading with them and don't really have or maybe do some legal right, make sure they give you all 4 options, not just 2, to become a territory oppressed or a state oppressed. The number 1 plank of the Alaskan Independence Party, which I am the state chairman of, the number 1 is independence for all individual Alaskans through any peaceful and lawful means. And I say peaceful, if you go back and you see any time that there's been a war, just like there was with the Revolutionary War with the U.S., when they got done, did they have a more free society than Canada had for several years? No. No. War does not equal freedom.
Oh, you're ending there. That's brilliant. I didn't know you're ending there. That's awesome. Okay, that's perfect. So, Edwin, you're from Western Togoland. Originally, I know you haven't been able to return back to the homeland in a while because of discriminatory practices. Tell us about who you are and why does Western Togoland deserve to be free? Please, sir.
Thank you very much. Edwin Dika is my name. And the people of Western Togoland need their dignity and freedom. There is nothing more important than freedom. And that is what we fight for. Now, having said that, I want to thank you, the organizers, for bringing this up so that people will be given the opportunity to talk about their problems, especially when it comes to self-determination. Yeah, at this point, I deem it significant to give you a brief overview of the history of Togoland, just to refresh the memories of those who already have knowledge of it, and in addition, provide vivid and true information to those who will be hearing about it for the first time. In the beginning, we had Togoland. That was a country by itself between French Dahomey, which is now the country of Benin, and the English colony of Gold Coast, now known as Ghana. In 1884, the Germans came to Togoland and signed a treaty of commerce and amity with Togoland kings. During the First World War, which was mainly a war of continental Europe, notwithstanding, France and Britain attacked Togoland and divided the country into two. Maybe they envied the Germans being there because they know there are a lot of resources that they could use. Normally, when we call Africa, the resources are there. And when we mention Togoland, the little land strip now standing between Ghana in the eastern side and bordering the Republic of Togo, we have abundance of mineral resources, including uranium, gold, diamond, bauxite. We have a whole lot of clinker for cement and a whole lot of things. And the people are highly educated and willing to govern themselves, not to be united with any other country and then throwing their waste around. Well, the world body at the time when Togoland was invaded by French and the English did not hesitate to intervene and ordered that the divided Togoland must not be colonized or added to the existing colonies of Dahomey and Gold Coast, but failed woefully to request the withdrawal of the invading forces in order to keep Togoland undivided. East and West Togoland then became trusteeship territories under the Trusteeship Council of the United Nations. In the 1950s, when the wind of independence was blowing across Africa, and British colonial Gold Coast was about to gain her independence, Britain duly informed the United Nations and suggested that the position of their trust territory of Togoland be reconsidered. After a series of deliberations on the matter, a referendum was agreed upon, which they dubbed plebiscite. The citizens initially, that's the citizens of Western Togoland, they initially decried this arrangement and argued that they found the whole arrangement dehumanizing because they wouldn't like to vote to choose another country to be called their own. Britain then made sure that the referendum was carried out without participation of huge areas of southern Western Togoland, just to get the win and do what they wanted to do with the nation. The people there actually better understood the consequences and effects of the exercise and what it will bear upon them during their political future. All UN directives on the conduct of the referendum was ignored by Britain, including the trusteeship territories, the trusteeship committee's recommendation that the land be granted independence before the referendum. The UN rejected the idea of British suggesting the UN rejected the British idea of integration and replaced it with union, and requested that the union documents be prepared for endorsement by both Western Togoland and Gold Coast. The British Foreign Secretary at the time, Sir Alan Noble, sent a letter to the UN informing the House, inter alia, that under the Ghana Independence Act, at midnight of 5th March 1957, Gold Coast became the independent state of Ghana. And under the same act, the union between Gold Coast and the British administration and Ghana took place, with effect from the same time and date. Meanwhile, the Ghana Independence Act itself did not feature Western Togoland anywhere in the document. So the British lied to the UN. And if you look at it from here, the Independence Act was in the year 1957, but we have it somewhere, I think in one of the decolonization documents that listed countries that became independent, that Western Togoland was given independence in 1961. So there is a huge anomaly over there. Anytime we move to demand restoration of our dear country, we are met with arbitrary arrests, killing, torture, and imprisonment. First was the massacre in towns of Alavanyo and Bandu and their environs. They attacked the people in the middle of the night, burned down their houses, and massacred them. Even pregnant women were lined up and shot dead, saying that whatever was in their stomach would be born, and one day they would stand against the integration. So we faced things like that. We had a lot of them in the Nkrumah and Ashampon era. It was always massacre. And during the unpopular and corrupt leadership of Akufo-Addo in recent years, our people went on peaceful demonstration and blocked roads with river sand in support of their call for independence. As usual, and in a more brutal force, they were met with soldiers, police, and armored tanks. Now, the question is, they sprayed the people with live ammunitions. The question is, are we at war? The people went there with no ammunition, no weapons, and then they ended up being shot at. As I speak today, we still have over 50 of our men serving various terms in the notorious medium security prison in Isawam. Many of them already had died in detention during under torture and molestation. Their trials were politicized. They were initially charged with treason, but finally sentenced for belonging to prohibited organizations. I wonder where that came from. Is Western Togoland the prohibited organizations? Well, that's not the first time. Ghana also had the opportunity or the audacity to disrespect the decision of the International Human Rights Organization on some of the arrests and blatant human rights abuses. The latest was the atrocity that we witnessed when the Akosombo Dam, water from the Akosombo Dam, the biggest man-made land lake, was released upon the people of Lower Volta. Many people think this was an accident, but never. People worked there on the project day and night, 24/7. And the water level is being constantly checked, and the tragedy should have been avoided. But the president went there, and all he could tell the victims was that they never vote for him. So that means there was no government help coming, and none came. Help came only from private organizations, including citizens in the diaspora. They saw it fit to take out southern Western Togoland from the national budget, although we generate incomes also, and our people also pay taxes like other parts of the country. In conclusion, let us consider the following important facts and questions. If East Togoland and the French administration could be granted independence as directed by the United Nations, why then the British should not have done the needful and similarly grant Western Togoland their independence. Also, if it is at all necessary to join Western Togoland with another state before it could stand as a nation, why not rather reunite Togoland and bring the country back to its original status, but instead adopting forced integration with people of different cultures and unconscionable behaviors. In view of the foregoing, therefore, we wish to use this opportunity to respectfully call on the United Nations to recall the matter of Western Togoland for corrections. We also wish to entreat all freedom-loving people of the world at large, including governments, organizations, to help us in every possible way to free Western Togoland from the unfair and barbaric treatments we have endured from the times of British involvement to present-day Ghana. Thank you very much.
Great. Ethan, we're going to go to you.
Yes.
Ethan from New England Independence, it's great to see you again. Thanks for contacting us earlier. Really appreciate it. Love working with you guys. We're going to go to New England Independence for 10 minutes. Ethan, why does New England need to be independent? Oh, I'm sorry. Before you answer that, we're going to go to New England Independence. Then we're going to go to Nick Boss with Red State. Then we're going to go to Laura Arndt, the Mithwakazi, and then we'll move down from there. So we'll make sure to get everybody who's here. So let's go to Ethan, New England Independence. Why does New England, and then we'll go to you, Nick, after him. Why does New England need to be independent, Ethan, in your opinion? Who are you, and why does that region of America need to be independent?
Okay, so I'm going to try and keep this brief because I know you guys have been all patiently waiting on the call for quite a while. But I do want to say thank you all for the invite and Calexit for coordinating this. It's been incredibly helpful, and I don't think anyone else has given anyone space to really talk about this. So as I said, to keep this brief, New England Autonomy Movement is not strictly for independence. While we do advocate for self-determination for every state and every member of the Union, it's not our main goal. Our main goal is about strengthening state ties to be less reliant on the federal government so that we're able to be successfully independent in the future, should we choose to go that way. But we want to make it so that every state has the ability to do so. And New England itself has had a long-standing independence movement since the early 1800s at the Hartford Convention. Our reasons for why we want independence is very similar to Mr. Miller's previous comments from Texas on that we are being underrepresented by the federal government, overspending, and we put in far more money to the federal government than we get back. New England does encompass Vermont and New Hampshire, as some of the members have been in this call for separate movements. But as I said, we are more looking for strengthening state ties and instituting state agencies and departments so that we're no longer reliant on the federal government, whether that's the Department of Education or the Department of Agriculture, or creating interstate compacts as we have with Canada and other New England states. So New England as a whole has entered into different agreements with not only each other, but foreign powers. And our hope is to just continue with that to make us less reliant. We already have a New England Board of Higher Education, and we had done something similar during COVID. And our hope is to just continue to push for these. And then if we are able to, as one of the New Hampshire members had mentioned about the hope to pull away from income taxes, while we are not associated with that, that is also something we would hope to do from federally, as we want to pull away from putting into federal taxes and form a regional tax system, and essentially help take all of the money that we're not using for the region and get it to be more properly allocated. Vermont and Maine and a lot of upper New England has significant issues for infrastructure and social programs that they can't properly fund because they don't have the access. Oh, sorry. Where did I cut off?
Around where you're talking about Vermont.
Okay, so Vermont and Maine both have a lot of infrastructure and social programs that they can't properly fund without without federal income, because they don't have access to the money that's being put into it. So the hope is to create a regional tax system to more appropriately allocate our funds and basically better prepare the states should they choose for independence. That's pretty much it. I'm not going to drag you out with statistics on where we rank for GDP or culturally, how we've been independent from the rest of the country for several hundred years. I don't think it's necessary to rehash our entire history. So I just want to say thank you all for the time. And we are the New England Autonomy Movement, and you can find us at the New England Autonomy Movement.org.
We are now going to move to Nicholas Boss of Red State Secession.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicholas Boss. I'm with the Red State Secession Movement. And just like with Mr. Glass previously, I'm gonna keep it simple and short. So since we're running out of time, so we, the Red State Secession Movement, advocate for the peaceful political partition of the United States of America into blue left-wing and red right-wing countries. Now, when our country was founded, we once shared beliefs in some basic common values and principles. But in the interceding years, we have developed irreconcilable differences in these values and principles. And a house divided cannot stand. And we recognize that. And these irreconcilable differences have been made clear by the roller coaster of political upheavals that have gripped our country in the last in recent years. The election of Donald Trump, then Biden, then all of this riffraff, all of this horrible, all of this unsettlement in our country. It's been because we have irreconcilable differences between the left wing and the right wing in our country. Each side cannot and will not compromise. And they are willing to fight and stand up for their beliefs. And each side hates the other, unfortunately. The logical way to move forward, and the logical thing to think about it is this can end either two ways, peacefully or violently. We must choose the peaceful option. The violent option is not a choice. The only viable way forward is to work together, both left wing and right wing, to use the political process to separate from each other into separate countries, so we all can live the way we want to, in peace and prosperity for perpetuity. We thank Calexit for inviting us, and we are looking forward to working with any group, left wing and right wing, that shares our belief in the right to self-determination, even for the opposition. And once again, I want to thank Calexit for inviting us to this event.
Hello. Perfect. You're on. Hello. Thank you, the host. I'm happy to meet everyone on the Zoom, and I'm calling in from, I'm joining in from Bwindi, Uganda, the Bwindi Forest. I'm one of the battle. Unfortunately, I don't have the line.
You're doing great.
Yeah. So I bring sad story about our tribe in Bwindi, Uganda. We are one of the forest dwellers that used to live in the forest. Our ancestors have lived in the forest for over 800 years, but now we don't have access to the forest. We used to live with the gorillas, the chimpanzee, and other animals, but now we don't have access. The park is now a product of the government of Uganda and partners like UNESCO, so we do not have any right to access the forest. I bring in concern that even some of our ancestors and our relatives have been massacred because we didn't have any rights. When I saw the previous speakers, I was really concerned because we really have a road to share as people and get connected all over. I've been shared this contact by several friends, and I'm happy to connect with Marcus Evans from the United States and Rara Andent. Perhaps I'm one of the person with an old woman in the picture. When you see the pictures, I've done a video tape interview with our relatives and elders, and they were speaking a lot of misery stories about how they used to conserve the forest, but now they don't have any access to the forest now. So I bring lots of concern, connections with people across the world, so that some of our relatives can get housings because we do not have enough housing. Some of our children don't have access to education. We don't look for independence, as I've been seeing in the concept. We look for justice. We look for justice to access social services like education, housing, land for agriculture, and any other productive activity that can be engaged in. I appreciate the government of Uganda, though there's been some mismatch, but there's some considerate that when we came out of the forest, some were able to get land, but the land is not enough. So if we got some support, and then we can reset everyone, we are good to match with the rest of the societies across the globe. I'm happy to join the Global Summit for the first time, and I bring Disney from Uganda and from our people, the Pata people. Thank you very much. I don't want to spend a lot of time sharing because it is already late down here. We are very many hours far from America. Yeah,
So
maybe
Ezra,
Laurie can add on. Yeah.
I'm going to show the videos. So Ezra has
Please.
a compilation of just a couple minutes of videos,
Okay.
And then he'll interpret a few things on the other side.
Go ahead, please. So the meaning of that song is we used to sing those songs when our elders were coming out from the forest. And the last batch of the forest dwellers left the forest in 1991. So the meaning of that song is the battle have left the forest for the conservation and protection of mountain gorillas and other apes like chimpanzees and other wildlife. That's the precise meaning of that song. Could you also show the other video with me and
I thought I was showing the compilation of all of them. So hold on a second here. Let me go back.
All right.
Give me a second. Almost there. Okay. Okay. I'll fast forward through this. Okay, hold on here.
Mr. Zephaniah says that whoever would find a rock, which we call a rock, then that is the precious home, whereby it was most considered as the permanent house. And such a person who would find a rock, they would make it a good house, because as long as there is no any leak, they would get married the most beautiful women by that time. Echindi.
Yeah, that is one of our eldest man called Zephaniah. He's 103 years old. He used to live in the forest. So when I met him, I'm a young man because I'm just 38 years. So I've been doing this work because of the support of Laura Anden. So we're trying to see how we can match stories of relatives from different parts of the world and make sure we share with the rest of the world. So he was sharing with me where he used to live. He used to live under the rock. A rock, yes. So whenever you find a rock, you'd find a press. It was a precious press. As long as there is no any leak, as you had me speak to him, when they would find a rock, those were the richest people. Like you find rich Americans who have golf or expensive houses. So when you're living under a rock, you're living under a very, very precious house. I appreciate it, and I wish everyone a good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so glad to see that folks from Batwa can be represented here today. We have a project that we're working on with Calexit that hopefully sometime within a generation, we might be able to help the Batwa people with their quest for survival and their quest for justice.
Thank you very much.
I don't know if you mind if I just come in. I'm just fascinated, if I could just ask Ezra a quick question. That gentleman that was 103, 104 years old, I'd be fascinated to know what is his average diet? Well, what sort of lifestyle does he live to such a ripe old age? Does he eat vegetables from the forest, or is it a combination of meat and vegetables? That's amazing.
We love to feed on forest fruits, honey, and some animals. But unfortunately, those are some of the few living, because most of our
most of our ancestors have passed on because of missing such kind of food because of protection of the pack. So we are trying to do some concept with Anden to see how we can rebring culture into this. To see how we can plant forest fruits that were being fed when our ancestors were living in the forest as young people. That's what we are trying to work on. We are doing that with our Hona, Laura Anden. She's based in Colorado, and we're happy that she usually comes, and every time she comes down here, we share stories with some of the elders on how we can proceed on missed culture that we have missed for the past years. But some of those elders are living because of masses, I can say. We have a few. We have actually lost one of the oldest Batwa who had 131. She was buried a few.
How much? How old?
131
years old.
31. 131.
31.
Yes, please.
Wow. Wow.
So when Ezra and a team just a few months ago did interviews and visited these different villages, and were over 100. That was common, and there was a 90-year-old who was very sad that she wasn't going to live a full life because she didn't have the foods and medicines from the forest.
Wow. Wow. Amazing.
Wow. For noticing.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing. That is some incredible information, and your people are quite resilient. That is for sure.
Yeah. You see, I was able to join. I'm one of the few survivors. So I'm really happy for this forum, and I really appreciate for the organizers. How I wish we can always have such a discussion, because you can say I'm in darkness. You find a torch to make sure you join the rest of the world. Yeah. I'm very serious to make sure I'm joined here.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ezra.
You're welcome.
We're moving now to Mithwazaki. MLM Mithwazaki.
Okay. Greetings to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to be part of the summit. My name is Swangan Ngwenya, a leader of Mtwagazi Liberation Movement. It's time to patrol. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, thanks. Thank you once more to the organizers of the Global Summit on Self-Determination for affording us the opportunity to be part of this historic event. If I can explain a bit what MLM is and what we stand for. MLM is a political movement representing the people occupying the western parts and Midlands of the present-day Zimbabwe, which was founded in 2010 as Mtwagazi Liberation Front, before changing its name to Mtwagazi Liberation Movement in 2016, with the ultimate objective, among others, to restore the statehood of Mtwagazi, which was destroyed through conquest by the British South African Company in 1893. Where about 6,000 of our forefathers were killed. As a state, Mtwagazi is a country that was founded by King Mzilikazi Khumalo in the 1830s after fleeing the armies of Paul Kruger in the Transvaal in present-day South Africa. During the reign of the second king of Mtwagazi, King Lopengula Khumalo, from 1870 to 1893, he signed a number of treaties with the neighboring states, signaling the the territorial independence of Ntwagazi. In 1887, he signed the Treaty of Friendship with Peter Grobler as the representative of Paul Kruger, the Prime Minister of Transvaal. The treaty agreed that Limpopo River to be to the south of Ntwagazi was the border line between the two states. On 11 February 1888, King Lopengula and the British Assistant Commissioner for the Protectorate of Bechuanaland, now Botswana, Reverend Moffat, representing Sir Hercules Robinson, who was the High Commissioner and the Governor of the Cape, signed the Moffat Treaty of Peace and Unity, which was ratified again in June 25, 1888. The treaty agreed that the river Zambezi to the north was the borderline between Ntwagazi and the Protectorate of Barotseland, now Zambia. It further agreed that the river Ramakwebana to the west was the borderline with the Protectorate of Bechuanaland. In the same year, 1888, King Lopengula signed the Rudd Concession with Charles Rudd, James Rochford Maguire, and Francis Thompson, the representatives of Cecil John Rhodes, where they agreed on the Jameson Line, which runs along Sanyati River to be the border between Ntwagazi and Mashonaland, now Zimbabwe, to the east. It then happened that in November 1893, the armies of Cecil John Rhodes, the British South African Company, invaded Ntwagazi and destroyed our kingdom. From the time of the destruction of our kingdom, we were ruled as separate states with Zimbabwe, which was Zimbabwe or Mashonaland, which had been occupied by the British South African Company earlier in 1890. We were then merged together in 1923 through a referendum by the only whites without the consent of the natives, thereby forming the state that was called Southern Rhodesia, which then changed in 1980 to be Zimbabwe. Ntwagazi is a land of about 190,000 square kilometers, and with the population of about 5 to 7 million people, which include the blacks, whites, coloreds, and Indians. Ntwagazi is a state rich in minerals. It has vast lands of farming, cattle ranching, wildlife, and resort and tourism. Under the government of Zimbabwe, Ntwagazi people have had the worst of human rights abuses, which includes the genocide of 1981 to 1987, which killed more than 80,000 people. And no one has ever been held accountable for the massacres. We have suffered so much cultural genocide, whereby the regime has tried all it can to defile our cultural shrines, shooting at the Spirit Medium Shrine in the early 90s, dumping the human bones at the shrine. It has further refused the people of Ntoga's every right to restore and practice their cultures. The government of Zimbabwe has excluded the people of Ntogazi in all economic development plans, denying them all opportunities of partaking in the economic growth of Zimbabwe. The unemployment in Ntogazi is well above 70%, which is why most of the people of Ntogazi are out of the country trying to seek greener pastures. Under the government of Zimbabwe, we have seen no development at all. The little infrastructure that had been left by the white government in 1980 has since been dilapidated, and with some of the industrial machinery looted by the government to the eastern parts of the country. We have encountered the ruthlessness of the government of Zimbabwe whenever we voice our concerns or our needs for self-determination. So we are so much happy that we got this opportunity to tell the world our side of the story. We are hopeful that someday we will get the freedom that we need and that our people deserve. We thank you so much.
I want to thank the Myth Wakazi for coming out. Thank you so much. Azuka, 2 minutes, please. Talk to us about what's going on. You heard some of the original speeches. What more would you like to add, Azuka? Please tell us.
Thank you so very much, Marc. And I am so delighted about this this wonderful summit. I know I must applaud my mom. I used to call her. She's a very reputable woman. I think she has highlighted everything that is happening in Nigeria. In the contraction, that's what we call it, it's called Nigeria. But I must thank her for everything she has said here. All she has said are true. So, but the only thing that I'm trying to add here is how this wonderful organization is going to help us to create this awareness and to keep, letting these issues that is happening in Biafra land, because our people have been murdered and our women have been raped and a lot of things, economic hardship everywhere. And people are just suffering for nothing, where we have everything in abundance that God has, endowed us with, where we are given everything. We have gold, californium, we have uranium, at its peak. But all these things are being, carried away from us by the some of the Western world, like United Kingdom and other allies that used to come to Nigeria to take all these things. And there is no presence of Nigerian government in the southeast, which have been clamoring for a long, long time that they should do this, that they should bring the presence of federal governments like international airports, international seaports, and every other thing, infrastructures, that will help our people. And more so, our youths are being denied of their, their rights. You see a lot of people that graduated from school, universities, PhD holders, master's degrees. These men are Western. And the only thing they do is to reintegrate the terrorists into the army, and then they send them down to the east and start killing our men. So that is appalling and, of course, very disturbing. So that is why we are crying. We have marched to United States. We have marched to United Kingdom. We have protested here and there, and nobody is listening to us because of the interest of the economy, which the British government has in that very contraption. So please, I would like you guys to help us. If you want us to come more, we will make ourselves available so that we will discuss more, because we want this thing to be getting out there so that we will be able to have this freedom by all means and at all costs. We need freedom. We don't want to negotiate anymore. We want referendum and then let our people go so that we can live as human beings created by God Almighty. Thank you guys so much. And we're waiting to hear from you guys more.
Thank you so much, Azuka, for speaking about what's going on in your area. We're gonna be ending the ceremonies very soon. We're gonna go to George Nyakpo for 2 minutes, and then we're gonna go to Jason Wright for wrapping it up. George, it's good to see you again, brother. What's going on in Western Togoland? Oh, you're
Good to see you.
Tell us, speak for about 2 to 3 minutes, brother, and then we gotta go.
Thank you so much. Well, I salute everybody in the summit, and I wish to congratulate our rep, Mr. Edwin, for presenting the Western Togoland issue to the general public and the world. The Western Togoland situation, many people consider it as a secessionist movement, but actually it is not a secessionist movement. Ghana, as we have it today, and Western Togoland are not the same entity in colonialism. Britain did not colonize Western Togoland. Britain was just to be a caretaker for a United Nations territory. That is why it was called Togoland, United Nations Trust Territory of Togoland under British administration. So you are just to administer the territory, and by giving it full status of what a country is supposed to be, because you were the one who invade the country and destroy it. So you have to build it back and give it to the people. But unfortunately, we have our destiny toyed with till today. As we speak, if you come to Togoland, there are a lot of humanizing situation that is happening. A large portion of our community is currently under the sea. As we speak, the government of Ghana has never done anything about reclaiming the land or protecting the land against the ravages of the sea. Today, as we speak, the whole community is underwater and people are crying. They don't even know where to go. The government of Ghana has not issued a single statement on the issue. So our country has just been left out. And anytime we demand accountability, they said we voted in the plebiscite. The plebiscite results by the United Nations states that the country should not be integrated. As per the resolution 1044 FI, we are supposed to be in union. If I am to be in union with you, even the name of the union, who decide it? Who decide the name? So that is our situation. That's our difficulty, and we are calling that we want our country to exit so that we have our autonomous and rule ourselves and determine our future. So I welcome all of you. I thank you so much. We need collaboration so that we can achieve our aim. As the leader of Texas have said, we need to work together so that we can achieve the common goal. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, George. It's good to see you, brother.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, let's switch chairs real quick. I forgot we have to do the Calexit part. Give me 1 second. Yeah, I'm trying to find we had a video with Shaka Shakur. He's in prison in Indiana, and he made a video for us. Give me 1 second to see. Poka, can you hear me now?
Yes, I hear you well.
Oh, perfect.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Poka, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you, Marc.
Oh, great. Okay. Admin, stay with me for a minute. We're just gonna wrap up the show, and then I'll have you come over because I'm gonna have you in the recording. So we're gonna go to Poka right now, and then we'll do our last Shaka Shakur. So let's go to Poka. Poka, you're with Hawaii Sovereignty. Who are you, and could you explain why Hawaii needs to be independent in less than 10 minutes, sir, please?
In less than 10 minutes.
Sorry.
You know, the whole subject of Hawaiian sovereignty is big. And it goes back to over 100 years ago when the Hawaiian nation was formally recognized as an independent nation within the international community. And the United States came into Hawaii and committed an overthrow, which is all documented by not only Hawaiian materials, but by American materials as well as international materials. And so we have taken a look at that history, and we have taken a look at what has happened to Hawaii over the last 100 years, the colonization of Hawaii. And then we're projecting into the future. What is the future of Hawaii? Are we to be nothing more than a clone United States colony? Or does Hawaii have the right to be an independent nation as we had been previously? Now, it's a very large subject, and you have many academicians, politicians, attorneys, and various ground movements with regards to this question of Hawaiian sovereignty. So I shouldn't be looked at as the only spokesperson. I have one particular voice, and that voice is that we should be an independent nation. We should decouple from the United States and exercise our right to self-determination. I have promoted this argument over the last about 40 to 50 years since I was a young man discovering the history of Hawaii while in the U.S. military and finding that the United States was committing the same kind of crime that they had been committing while I was in the military in the Vietnam War or in the Korean War, and subsequent to that in the many other interventions by the United States. So the question is one of independence, the right of people to choose what they want to become, how they want to unfold from the United States colonization. And there's also many other considerations. I'd like to divide the story of Hawaiian sovereignty into essentially three parts. The first part is a historical analysis, a look at the fact that Hawaii had been an independent nation and simply invaded by the United States in 1893. And that history is well documented, not only by Hawaiian sources, but by the United States, who in 1893, President Cleveland came to the US Congress and confessed that the United States committed an international crime, had simply taken over Hawaii against the laws that existed at that time and remained in possession of Hawaii up to the present time. There's a lot of historical details of that story, and in 10 minutes, there's no way I would be able to cover just a fraction of it. So I will come over to the next section of the reasons for Hawaiian decoupling or self-determination. And that is a process of colonization. Imagine an independent nation. You can imagine one of the Indian tribes, or you can imagine any nation that now exists with a historical background. To have another country simply come in and impose its laws and claim that you are now American citizens without a choice of the people themselves, and but by this simple declaration, a theft of the sovereignty of a people, taking your language from you, changing your history, taking over the educational system, and then teaching the people in that area that the education or your history is an American history. Your heroes are American heroes. And just not revolutionizing, but changing over the mental structure of the people. That is what Hawaii has undergone during this process of colonization. And so much so that I, who grew up in Hawaii, went to the public schools in Hawaii, which are mandated that you all attend these public schools. And then they changed the whole thinking of the people of Hawaii to believe that we were actually American citizens, believing that the Americans simply came to assist the Hawaiians and to bring them up into the American culture. Over a period of time, we start thinking about what is the appropriateness of adopting or adapting to Americanism. But we had no choice. That's what we were destined to become, we were told. In the more recent history, about the last, I'd say, 30 years, the people of Hawaii started asking themselves, why do we have no other direction to go than simply to mimic the ways of the American people? And as a result, the Hawaiian sovereignty movement started coming about. And so, as I said, I have been involved in the sovereignty movement for a number of years and have created a website where people can go to, and that is at www.hawaiianperspectives.org. And there you can find many of the different aspects of Hawaiian sovereignty. So that's the second portion. Why should we become a sovereign and independent nation? You know, some people who have been kept in jail for a long time would say nothing is as sweet as freedom itself. To try to trade off, oh, you have better housing condition, you have better communications, you have higher levels of education, and all of these substitutes for being an independent nation does not make it, does not equate to independence, to sovereignty, to being able to lead ourselves into our future. And so essentially that is what Hawaiian sovereignty is all about, to regain our own integrity as an independent nation. You know, sometimes what the Americans will do is they will substitute or try to make a comparison, and it's a selective comparison. They would say, well, look at you. You have democracy now in your country. You have modernity in your country. You have respect in your country. But they tend to forget that they are comparing today's Hawaii and today's American society with a past in which they select all the negative aspects that they have drawn as to who we were, that we couldn't speak the English language, that we had this weird dance called the hula, and that we were a backward people. But when you sit back and compare that Hawaii, before the overthrow, had the highest educational level, our literacy rate was the highest in the world, if not second to the highest in the world. The second highest would be the nation of Switzerland. The United States was far behind in that measure. We had electronics. Our national capital, Iolani Palace, had built within the palace telephone and electricity far before the United States had it in the U.S. White House. We had the modernity of flushing toilets in Hawaii. We had trains and cars and electricity, as I said, that lined the streets of Hawaii. We were not a backward country. Our educational system was one of the highest in the world. The schools that we had were mandated that every child attend school, far ahead of the United States. So when you make a comparison, you have to select the appropriate time frame and then compare these countries. Now let me come to the third part of the movement for Hawaiian sovereignty.
Hey,
And that
Poka,
is,
2 minutes left, sir. 2 minutes left. Okay.
yes, and that is, what is the future of Hawaii? Are we forever limited to being part of the United States, or can we become a nation that leads the world in terms of our education system, our belief system, our cultural system, and all of these things? Can we lead the world in being a peace nation? It's something that is so badly needed today in the world. So those are the three areas: one, historical; two, the current situation, the colonization that goes on in Hawaii; and the third is, what is the prospect for our future? Let us dream about what can become a real Hawaiian nation. Marc, I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to share some of my thoughts, and my aloha to you and your organization.
It's been a pleasure knowing you for years. You have been an inspiration to many of the other independence movements, specifically because you've been at this for decades, and that you got your law degree so that you could better argue for sovereignty, and you single-handedly elevated the sovereignty argument for your people. Additionally, I got to say, when we did the last international summit and you were willing to come online while you were waiting for your kidney dialysis, showed us how willing we all should be to make sacrifices to make sure that we're getting the message out for our movement. It was deeply inspiring to all of us for you to do that. And you are an inspiration, and you have been to all of us.
Thank you, Marc. Aloha.
Aloha. Okay, admin, are you there? Mike?
Yes.
I sent you a video on email. it's the last video we need to show. It's of Shaka Shakur of the African American Independence Movement. Is it possible for us to play that video?
So there's a problem playing videos over Zoom, and I think almost any streaming service, and I think it's a restriction because they don't want us to stream movies, stuff, content, but I'll try. I know it's right on YouTube. I think a better way to do it would be to share the link with everyone via email or something. But
okay, I'm just going to play it through my video.
Okay.
Yeah, just a second. Guys, I'm sorry. I got to get on camera, so I need to quiet for about 6 minutes, and then I'll be done, and then we're done. Okay. Thank you, everybody. This will be our last presentation. It will be of Shaka Shakur of the African American Independent Homeland. It's called a New African Political Prisoner. Shaka Shakur has been a advocate for a African American homeland for a while. We had been speaking to a few members of the group, and we were able to get this video from Shaka. Shaka is currently in prison, and so please forgive some of the audio quality of the video. He made this video in prison, and we're presenting it to you now. Shaka Shakur from prison.
My name is Shaka Shakur. I'm a New African political prisoner and member of the New African Independence Movement. I've served a 62-year sentence for the wrongful conviction of an alleged attempted murder of a police officer. I'm currently being held in domestic exile in the Commonwealth of Virginia, where I've begun my 23rd year of captivity, and 13 of those years were served within solitary confinement unjustifiably. I would like to thank the Calexit organization for this opportunity to participate within this summit, and would love to hear from some of the other participants and movements that are involved. You can reach me at shakashakur.org. Let this event be a bridge to cultivate strategic alliances and open up serious lines of communication. This is my presentation. Free the land, the Republic of New Africa. A colonizer doesn't have the right to impose a false citizenship or nationality upon the colonized or a people that the colonizer has enslaved. What is nationality? What is a plebiscite vote, also known as the people's vote? What is historical development or historical continuity within the context of a specific people? What is national origin, and how does such differ within the context within the context of a specific people? What is national origin? How does such differ within the context of a birthright? This is a movement for national liberation. The question that means that they're not abstract or rhetorical. Why are the correct context for these questions still relevant to the correct ideology of political practice? In March of 1968, over 500 New African revolutionary nationalists and activists came together and formally gave name to the New African nation and its historical development. Led by the First Lady of the nation, Queen Mother Moore, they officially served notice on the colonizer and settler nation of the United States by issuing a Declaration of Independence and New African Creed, designating the national territory with the mandate to free the land by any means necessary. It is this mandate that helped give further rise and credence to the New African Independence Movement, better known as NAIM, and subsequently the New African People's Liberation Army, NAPLA. Black/New African people began to metamorphose and transform into something new, reborn, reshaped from our first hostile contact and interaction with the colonizer on the continent of Africa and throughout the diaspora. We were still African and representative of our ethnic and tribal origins or distinctions, but it was this contact that forced new social relations where we developed new social reflexes to a new form of reality coming in the form of colonial genocide and super exploitation. This reshaping, this reconfiguration, this forging of many into one people, into a black fist with a survival backbone of steel, is in essence, the origin of the New African nation and a people in continuing battle for land, self-determination, independence, and for the right to be free. The rhythm of and internal motion of a people never stopped, whether it be in the bows of slave ships traveling across the Atlantic, in the cotton fields of Mississippi, or in the midst of marches surrounded by screams and shouts that Black Lives Matter. As the descendants of freedom fighters and in the tradition and legacy of the Maroons and our ancestors, we have a historic right and duty to land and the right as a people to decide what we want and whether we want to declare our separation from the U.S. government and its oppressive authority. Every social, psychological, physical, and spiritual ailment, hurt, pain, degradation that we suffer as a people can be traced back to our particular social and economical relationship to the U.S. government and regime. Always remember that an oppressive power does not have the right to impose second-class citizenship upon an oppressed people through force or manipulation, nor do you have the right to amend the people into a constitution that such people had no participation in or representation in drafting. If you do not think this struggle is real today, listen to the Trumpers talk about Project 2025. Listen to his minions talk about redefining birthright. Listen to the language they use when they talk about mass deportations and mass detention centers and use of the military and military bases. Pay attention to how similar this language sounds like World War II and Nazi Germany. Lastly, what is the difference between a revolutionary and an activist? A revolutionary has an ideology and a strategy geared towards removing or overthrowing an oppressive power or entity and replacing such with a more humane and just social order. Whereas an activist is issue-orientated and generally reformist-orientated and not necessarily committed to going to the extreme to remove that oppressive power. They just want change or to reform the existing power and social relations and dynamics, whereas we want to destroy them and rebuild something better for New African people and humanity as a whole. But that I say, free the land, all power to the people. Shaka Dear Shakur. And I would like to add suggested readings, notes and meditations on France Fanon by James Jacques Sales, also the book Stand Up, Struggle For It by Sanyika Shakur, also the book Free the Land by Edward Onasi, O-N-A-C-I, and lastly, The History of the North African Independence Movement by Chokwe Lumumba. Peace.
That was from Shaka Shakur. He has been an advocate for an African-American homeland, the New African Movement, for a while, and was imprisoned while participating in that. He shot the video direct from prison. We want to thank him for his participation. We apologize for some of the technical errors, and we aim to do better at the next summit. Thank you all for being here. And before we go, I just want to show you something if I can. This is the guest house. We already have guests in it. And it's got a pool table and a dinner and everything. And that's where we're going to be doing the 5-star dinner by a 5-star French trained chef and mingling for this evening. So while the video is off here, the event isn't over, but we'll keep it there. Admin, can you end recording and we'll leave it there?
Thank you so much, Marcus.
Thank you.
From Secession Speakeasy and around 300 to 400 people who watched on Odyssey and Rumble here today.
And we want to thank Secession Speakeasy. Secession Speakeasy has been a great partner, friend, ally, accolade of Calexit. Dr. Wall Grant was able to connect us with many people. I want to say thank you. That will be the end of our show. Admin, if you could end the recording.